Sometimes you want a method's arguments to be optional. You could achieve this by creating overloads for every possible combination of arguments, but that's an inefficient way to deal with the problem. You can create optional arguments by giving them a default value, which they will use automatically unless a value is provided. To begin this lesson, open the Textland solution from your sample files folder. And open encryptionfunctions.cs from the Encryption Library project. Now remove the second overload for the encrypt string method. You're going to replace this overload's functionality by making the encryption key and initialization vector arguments optional. You learned about overloads in Lesson 4.6. Now change the line that begins the encrypt string method from public static string encrypt string 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 to encrypt byte encryption key byte initialization vector to public static string encrypt string 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 to encrypt byte encryption key equals null byte initialization vector equals null. The encryption key and initialization vector arguments are now optional. If you call the method without specifying an encryption key or initialization vector, these arguments will take the default values of null. The encryption process won't work with null encryption keys and initialization vectors, so you'll have to change the code to work with the new optional arguments. Change the line aesalgorithm.key equals encryption key to if encryption key equals null aesalgorithm.key equals encoding.utf8.getBytes learn ASP.NET, C#, and Visual Studio. Else aesalgorithm.key equals encryption key. In the same way, change the code aesalgorithm.iv equals initialization vector to if initialization vector equals null aesalgorithm.iv equals new byte 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10 11 12 13 14 15 16 else aesalgorithm.iv equals initialization vector. The method will now use your default encryption key and initialization vector if one isn't specified. Now open the code behind file of encryption.aspx. Notice that there are no errors flagged with red underlines. The call to encrypt string still works correctly with a single argument. Let's examine the IntelliSense information for your new method. Add a new line to the button encrypt click event handler and type encryption library dot encryption functions dot encrypt string begin brackets. The IntelliSense menu appears. Optional arguments are shown in square brackets. Notice that there are no longer any overloads for your method. Now remove the code you just added. When calling a method with multiple optional arguments, you'll sometimes want to specify only one of them. You can do this by specifying the argument by name. This is called a named argument. Here's an example of how you'd call the encryptString method with just the string to encrypt and initialization vector arguments. Encryption library dot encryption functions dot encrypt string textbox encryption dot text initialization vector colon initialization vector. You could even call both arguments by name for completeness, as in this example. Encryption library dot encryption functions dot encrypt string string to encrypt colon textbox encryption dot text initialization vector colon initialization vector. You can use this technique with any method. This is sometimes useful to clarify which argument is which. Now let's test your code. View encryption.aspx in your web browser and click Encrypt. The text is encrypted without any problems. Close your web browser now and close Visual Studio. You've now completed Lesson 4.7. Add optional arguments to a method.